It's Chelsea,
It's Nina,
and you're in the Critics' Kingdom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of the Critics' Kingdom. This week, we are going to be reviewing Miracle in Lane 2. Came
Yes,
out
the popular Frankie Muniz joint.
in his heyday, when Frankie Muniz could do no wrong, when he was the sort of a king of children's television.
Yeah, for real. And I think what you were about to say was like that it came out in 2000. So this is like during that initial run of the DComs that were kind of the classics.
Yeah, it didn't. It was interesting because I didn't remember it as being that early. Like when I saw that date, I was like, "Huh." I thought for some reason in my head I pictured it as like a 2002 sort of film. Um, but I guess that does like it. I mean, that's the date. It's not even about whether or not it makes sense. That is the fact of this film. Um, but yeah, I guess maybe the reason that I did that though was because I really liked this movie as a kid. So I probably watched it whenever it was on, or pretty religiously when it was on, and therefore it just like stayed in my memory for longer. I would imagine that was sort of why I placed it later in time.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I feel like they played it a good amount when we were growing up. Like it was like one of the ones that was constantly in rotation because I feel like there were some that like they didn't play very often,
Yeah,
but this was one of the ones that like every couple of months it would be on.
yeah, and it also had like I'm gonna blank on his name, but the actor who plays his older brother was like I don't know. I think of him as one of my like quintessential Disney Channel or older brothers because he's like
Yeah.
the older brother and so weird, and he shows up in another DCOM too. I forget what it is,
He's in
but he's
Brink.
yeah. That's what he's in. Brink. He plays the friend, his
Right.
best friend. It's like he's like all over the place on Disney for a little period of time. So like I would just remember this as like sort of very classic, I guess, because of that.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of to get into the recap of the movie, it's actually based on a true story of this young boy named Justin Yoder. And Frankie Muniz is the one who's playing him. And he is a kid and he has spina bifida and hydrocephalus. So the spina bifida has made him, he uses a wheelchair, and the hydrocephalus, he just has it's basically an accumulation of spinal fluid in your brain. So it sometimes causes him to, throw up and, um, so sometimes do things not really wanting to, like his body just kind of does it involuntarily. And he has an older brother, Seth, and he has two parents, and his brother is kind of like the all-star, great at everything, loves sports and really good at sports type of kid, has a good group of friends, very, fairly popular from what we kind of see. And, since Justin is growing up with somebody like Seth as his brother, he feels a lot of not jealousy or envy, but he basically wants to have something that Seth has. Like he wants to have a trophy because he feels like that's what, he like loves Seth and looks up to Seth and is like, well, I could be just as good as Seth as long as I have my own trophy. But it's really hard for him to find places that'll let him play sports because they're always, saying you're in a wheelchair, you're differently abled, like we can't let you do that. You can't control sometimes what your body does. So he like tries to sign up for some baseball league. The guy's like, no, and then he accidentally throws up on him because his body just doesn't. So it just
In
kind of like hammers home the point, unfortunately.
It's a scene that lives on in my memory because that blue slushy man. It's
Yeah,
grotesque.
poor thing. It's so sad because his
um,
mom was really trying to fight for him to play at the summer league, and the coach, like after that happens, he's just like, absolutely not. Like
under no
he's not
circumstance.
going to be playing on the baseball league with us.
Oh.
So he like tries a bunch of different sports. He's then like, I'm gonna get into chess and I'm gonna become a chess champion. So he tells Seth, and Seth is like, I mean, okay. And so he, plays chess for I think about 2 days. And then is
Yeah.
like, I'm going to enter a tournament. Um,
You gotta
And
admire his moxie though. Like, all right,
no,
like
and the thing is, it's not like he
go
does
ahead.
bad. Like, I kind of wanted to be like, you clearly have aptitude for chess. Please pursue it. Because you learned how to play it in 3 days and like what got like third or fourth place. Like, that's crazy. For such a game like chess, but he still didn't get what he wanted, which is the trophy. So he's like rolling around after the chess, tournament, and right next to it, there's a car show going on. So all these people showing off their vintage cars that they've, repurposed and refitted and remade basically back to their original luster. And he sees his next door neighbor, Old Man Vic, who is this older guy who doesn't really talk to people, and the kids are afraid of him because he doesn't really come out of his house. And he sees that he's got this candy painted red Corvette, I believe. And he's like, oh, and he's in the way that the car show works is you have to like give them money, and the person that gets the most money, like from people that are walking around the cars, because the money is basically saying that you really like how they did the car. That's the person who wins. So Justin goes up to Old Man Vic and is like, look, you're not going to really win this because people are afraid of you. So why don't you let me take your donations, and you'll probably get a lot because I'm a little cute kid in a wheelchair. So Old Man Vic's like, fine. And he's like, but I want the trophy if we do win. And Old Man Vic's like, sure, that'll be our deal. They make said deal. And the next thing they know, Justin's getting everybody. Like, everybody is coming to him. They're like, you're so, he's cute. They like the car, blah, blah, blah. They end up winning. And Justin's like, oh my gosh, when are we going to get the trophy? And the guy's like, it takes like a week. So he's like, all right, fine, I'll be waiting for it. When he goes home, he starts having these like montages where he'll like talk one on one with God, and God for him is represented by this famous race car driver named Bobby Wade. Um, and it's basically him in his like mechanic shop, and he talks to Justin one on one, and Justin just asks him things like, "How can I do this?" and like blah blah blah. Just like having a one on one conversation. And Justin always feels like invigorated by these conversations. That's why he kind of like makes them up in his head. So, he like talks with Bobby Wade again and tells him like, "Hey, I think I'm gonna get a trophy." And Bobby is like, "Good job, Justin." And, and then the next week, Old Man Vic stops by their house because a trophy has arrived, and he sees Seth outside playing basketball, and Seth's like, "Oh, Justin's not back. He's with my mom right now. He's not here." And then Old Man Vic, he's like, he's about to give him the trophy, and then he's like, "No, just tell him to come. I'll come to him later and give him the trophy." So then as soon as Justin gets home, like 10 minutes later, Seth tells him, "Hey, Old Man Vic was by here to give you something, but he didn't say what." So then Justin's freaking out because he's like, "Oh my God, I'm going to get this trophy. Like, this is a great trophy. I'm going to finally be, me and Seth are now going to finally have our own trophies, blah, blah, blah." So he goes over to Old Man Vic's place. Old Man Vic doesn't answer his door, and he's not in the yard. So then Justin takes it upon himself to go into the man's shed. And
Breaks and entering. Breaks and
literally
entering.
goes into the man's shed, is looking around for it, sees a box up on the top of the man's shelf, or like big cabinet, and he's like, "Oh, I can use like these leaf things to like knock it down." Knocks over the whole shelf, messes up the man's Corvette in the process. And then I think it's also not the trophy from what I can
Nope.
remember. It was just like
It's
a
not.
random box.
It's not. It's. I think it was like a part.
It
It
was
might
like
have been a
parts.
part for the car or something like
Yeah,
that, but it was like not
it
not a
wasn't the
trophy.
trophy. So he basically just did all that for no reason. And Old Man Vic, of course, finds out, and he's like, "All right, you have to start helping me around my house and do chores to pay this off, basically." So Justin begins going over to Old Man Vic's house like every day, and they start, getting on very well and getting along. Um, and then he finds out that Old Man Vic actually used to coach his daughter in soapbox racing, and he sees it on film because again he sneaks into the man's shed again.
That he is
That the man did not want
explicitly
him in.
told to stay out of
Literally to not go into
multiple
this other
times.
shed. And he goes in there, watches the film of him coaching his daughter, and then immediately goes to Old Man Vic and is like, "You have to show me how to do this." And Old Man Vic is like, "Dude, I told you not to go in there." So he's mad. But he finally comes around, and Justin tells his dad about it. And so then Justin, his dad, and Old Man Vic go to a soapbox racing competition. And Justin and his dad immediately are like, "Yes, like this is it. Like we need to do this." this is awesome. And Old Man Vic, they ask Old Man Vic, will you be able to teach Justin how to do it? And Old Man Vic is like, I don't want to get involved with this anymore. Like, I left that life behind. Like, leave me alone. But they do manage to eventually make him like come around and at least like show him the basics. Um, all the while this is happening, Seth feels very ignored because now his father is going 120% into everything Justin and soapbox racing, but he's not going to Seth's games and really is showing up to Seth's activities and events. So Seth is feeling ignored. And we end up, finding out that he's starting to go to like some doctor's appointment like every week. And Justin is trying to figure out what is it because he's like, why is he going to see the doctor again? And like, da 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 da. And he's just, being nosy. And his mom is like, oh, he's just, he's just going to the doctor, blah, blah, blah. Um, and then we end up finding out that he's actually in therapy because him and Justin get into a fight one day outside when Seth is playing basketball. And Justin tells Seth and his friends, well, he's like, at least I'm not damaged like you and have to go to therapy every week, which obviously is very rude to Seth, and especially saying it in front of his friends. And they end up kind of like not making up, but like kind of getting over it or dealing with it together. And by the next race, or Justin's like first official race, they're back doing pretty well with each other, and they've talked to each other, and they've become all good about it. But at the next race, Justin was actually having issues with his hydrocephalus starts acting up, and he always knows because he starts feeling dizzy or woozy. And he ignores it though because he's like, I want to do this race, like I don't want to get sick, because when he gets sick he has to normally be in the hospital for a couple days, and he knows that will take him out of the race. So he ends up getting in the soapbox racing, like the car, and crashing because he can't steer well because he's so dizzy, and his eyes are starting, it affects his eyes. So he gets sick and he crashes and ends up having to go into the hospital for a while. And then his dad and parents are like, oh, we let him, now it's clouding his judgment, blah, blah, blah. Should we let him do it anymore? But he's out of the competition in general now because he got sick and crashed. He ends up getting back in because the person that did win over him drops out. So the next thing he knows, the whole family is now going to the soapbox racing national competition, and they're all very excited. The All American Soapbox Derby, that's what it's called. And he is then told by the regulators, like, hey, the brake that you have to use, because he has to use a foot brake because he can't use his hands. And they're like, the brake you use is not allowed. So you're going to have to like do something else about that. Or sorry, he has to use a hand brake, not a foot brake. That's what it is, because his legs don't work very well. And they're like, you can't do that. Everybody has to use a foot brake, not a hand brake. And so his brother Seth actually is the one who ends up saving the day, because he calls the media into the regulators meeting, and he's like, they won't let my brother compete, and they won't accommodate his disabilities. And the media then like pounces, of course, and they come into the regulators meeting, and the regulators are like, God, what happened to them not teaching in public schools? Just a horrible comment. But they end up winning. The Yoders end up winning. And Justin is able to race. And they end up naming that brake, the hand brake, the Justin brake, after him. And we also find out that the reason why Old Man Vic was initially running away from doing soapbox racing up until, his father, Justin and his father, convinced him, is because his daughter died in a swimming accident, and then his wife died a couple years later. So he just associated a lot of pain with it. But by this point now he's like fully on Team Justin. And Justin ends up winning the All-American Derby now that he's able to race. And before the movie ends, he asks God, aka Bobby Wade, if people are perfect when they go to heaven. And Bobby Wade's like, yeah. And then you see like images of angels in wheelchairs like going up to heaven, and then the movie ends. So that is Miracle in Lane 2.
And we will be right back with the review. So to get into the review, I guess maybe the first thing to just sort of bring up or mention is, tied into that ending, and just like even the title, like Miracle in Lane 2, like this way in which like God plays like a role in this. Like he spends so much time talking to God in this film. And it's interesting, Chelsea and I noted, just because outside of this one, the only other Disney Channel original movie that sort of expressly deals with God or religion in any sort of way is ironically a Full Court Miracle. But it's not it's just an interesting part of this particular film because it's not a film that is like about religion in any way or like necessitates a religious aspect.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess I would imagine that maybe it's just something that is like a fundamental part of the story of the real person. Like maybe the Yoders generally have a deep connection to God. And if I'm not mistaken, the writers for this film actually they knew the Yoders from church. It was like the
Yeah.
writers, yeah,
Yeah.
they were I forget the exact it's a branch of
They're Mennonites.
Mennonites, yeah. I was like, it's
Yeah.
a branch of but yeah, they're Mennonites and they knew the Yoders from church. So I guess like because of that, like it's just an interesting way to see sort of faith weaved into a decom because it doesn't happen very often. I assume that it happened because of how early it was, and yeah, it seems to be something that they more shy away from than anything else. So that was just a to me an interesting thing to note about this particular film.
Yeah, and then also how he typifies God to fit his specific what he likes. Like I thought that was also a funny part. Like it wasn't a very the way that we typically see God presented even in Christian media, where it's very much omnipotent and like
Yeah,
always the same though, you know? So I thought that that was also very interesting where it's like, you know, if you do believe in a God, he very much comes to you in the best way for you, in the way that would work best for you to get the message. Um, so I did quite enjoy that aspect as well, where it's like, you know, this boy likes race cars, so his God is, or the way that God works best for him is as one of his favorite race car drivers in his mechanic shop. Like that, and that's just what it is. Like I'm like, that's kind of a, you know, that's kind of a good question. And I feel like, or a good thing to do, I think, and just like to show it how it's just not always the same thing and how sometimes it's different for different people.
yeah, and I think it's just to piggyback on that, like it's a very kid friendly way of expressing because like it's actually a quite I don't want to use the word deep, but a sort of a loaded thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's you know, it's someone who is like he's 12 and he's handling it quite well, right? I mean, they really do tell the story, and it's partly probably why they used Frankie Muniz, but like they're telling it with this like Malcolm in the Middle, you know, voiceover POV driven like narrator that's like sort of self-deprecating and like sarcastic and like looks at the world through you know sort of cynical eyes a sort of very popular narrative tool of the early aughts um that was being found in like sitcoms and things of that nature, Malcolm in the Middle in particular. But like it's I don't know, I think that like it's a very kid friendly like it's a kid friendly way to do this thing that's like this is a kid who's going to be going through this for the rest of his life. And like I don't know, like I remember even like me being as a kid, like even as when I was a kid, whenever there's something that like is quote unquote wrong or like feels off in life, you know, many children grow up with some semblance of like religious faith. It doesn't matter sort of what religion it is, but they grow up with some sense of religious faith. And like around those ages of like, you know, essentially preteen years, like 9 through like 14, or like 9 through 12, I guess, preteen. But like there does begin a bit of like a questioning about difference, you know, and you start to wonder like why am I this way? Like why do I have these good things? Why do I have these maybe bad things that people tell me are bad? Like do I have this forever? What is this going to mean for me in life? Like all of these questions that can actually be like quite debilitating and
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to work through. And And I think that is something that like a kid watching this, and it could be, you know, like I said, I really enjoyed this when I was little. So I'm like, maybe like I watched this and like I latched onto this aspect of it too. Because I know like growing up, one of the things my mom would always tell me, you know, like you can always talk to God. Like that was like a refrain that I heard a lot growing up and still do. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's like it creates it's an easy way for a child to like see that and maybe relate to that without, weirdly enough, and I think even because it's a mechanic, without making it alienating, without wrapping it too much in like the specifics of the religion, you know, like it ends up being a really friendly way to like bridge that gap. um which like I respect, which I like respect them for in a certain way. Imagining of course that this was a choice made because the character that was based on has a specific relationship with God, and like that was maybe important to the, I said character, the person, to like be a part of the fictionalized story, you know?
Yeah, no, and I think it did. It was definitely part of the device that added to. It was a device that also added to the overall film, because it was also a great way for you to find out like what Justin was thinking in his inner thoughts that he wasn't necessarily saying in his narrative, like the narration.
Yeah.
Um, so it definitely was it worked very well for this. I would definitely say, and yeah, no, I think it was a very good. It was a good touch. It was a very good touch, and especially I think towards the end, the way that they played it, where all the angels are in wheelchairs, and that it's everything. Heaven can look different to different people, and I like that they portrayed it as that, because I do feel like I think we talked about this briefly, especially in Truth's Confession, but like typically when we show differently abled people, it's from a very ableist perspective, because it's from typically a lot of the times, especially the movies from this time period, it was very much coming from people that are abled. So it's like you're not automatically thinking like, oh, well, I would think that everybody when they're able, when they're differently able, would want to become abled when they go to heaven. It's like, no, that's not an assumption, because there's also just a overarching assumption that, you know, everybody wants to become normies or normal, like just abled people. And it's like, no, like that's so I guess an arrogant way of thinking would be one way to put it. Like,
Yeah, for sure,
you
for
know,
sure.
like that a lot of people just people grow up as they are, and like especially if you don't know any differently, or even if you don't, that doesn't mean people want to change just because that's what, you know, that's what's in the media and that's what is constantly portrayed as people that are able. And it's like there's plenty of differently abled people out there that don't want to change themselves, because why would they want to and why should they? That's how they are, that's how they were born. So I did really like that little touch of just being like, you know, everybody, all the angels are also in wheelchairs, and like he wouldn't change going from one to another. Not saying he's going to pass, like, but just saying like in his version of heaven, everybody is the same as him, and
Yeah.
there's no sudden like I can walk now, or I can, you know, or whatever it may be, or like I'm just, you know, a normal abled or an able person. So I liked that touch as well.
Yeah, I do. There is a part like I enjoyed that, and I remember like when it came on the screen, like I remember as a kid I had always really liked that moment at the end. Like that sort of flooded back to me. I was like, oh right, like this was a cool thing to see. But I do also wonder though, like it does feel like that, like the that is placed in the narrative to suggest that like that is a place or understanding that Justin has come to by the end of the film. You know, that he sort of actually start like he sort of begins in a place of attempting like not attempting to be able, but he wants something that he associates with like his brother and like abilities that he maybe doesn't have, right? Like he's like, oh, like, or he's trying to figure out a way to like get something that is a symbol of prowess with the abilities that he has, that are different from the typical ways that that symbol is acquired usually. And I guess my only question is like I do wonder if like maybe there is something in like maybe it goes a little bit farther back than that. Like it's not just accepting by the end that like or learning or coming to terms with the fact by the end that like oh like I don't like people can like be just like people can be like me like I like how I am the way I am, but maybe also like reconsidering like what symbols we use to define worth in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because like it is, and I like when it started I was like huh, like this whole thing about like him like really wanting this trophy. And it's like I completely like even as a kid I remember being like yeah like of course you want a trophy, like having a trophy is nice, like it means that you're really good at something. But I don't know, I guess it's just like in watching it a little bit older like I also questioned like just questioned the idea of the trophy to begin with, you know. And I think I brought this up to you, Chelsea, too. Like we see him get to a point where he literally ignores true pain that he's in, like ignores something that he knows is potentially life threatening, um, in pursuit of that. And it's like I wonder if like there is a I just wonder about the symbols that we use and like the rhetoric that we use to talk about the achievement of those symbols, about like fighting through pain, about like pushing your body past what you think it's capable of, like all of these things that like on the one hand I can completely see how it's like it is the whole idea of defying expectation and doing something that you didn't even think that you could, and like where the beauty is in that and where the nobility can be in that. But at the same time I wonder like is there an aspect to that that leads us to like I don't know, just like maybe stress ourselves unnecessarily over things that don't make us actually like maybe don't actually make us better or more worthy people, if that makes if any of that makes sense. Like it was a bit rambling.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like I think it is what you said. I think especially I'm gonna only, offer the perspective of America here, because I don't think this applies to most places or like everywhere. But
Yeah, that's real.
I think here especially, our value is very much tied to what you can do, um, and whether that's physically, whether that's mentally, whether that's whatever in whatever way it is, it's very much tied to what you can do. So if you're a athlete, if you're a smart person or a nerd or whatever, um, so it's like, but the problem is when you do something like that, or when you have a system like that, you're automatically leaving out people that don't exactly fit in those thin parameters, those
Mm-hmm.
very small parameters. And, I think that's why there's so many differently abled folks who are rightfully mad about, being ignored or being, like I was saying earlier, like automatically assuming that they're of less value to the point that you think that they want to be abled. Because that's really what that is. It's like such an arrogance in assuming that like the way you live is better than the way that they live, or exist in the world. Um, so I feel like that's also part of it. And then I think even what we were speaking about before we started recording was also just the idea of like even the fact that we got this specific movie in his perspective. You were wondering if that's because he is mentally and emotionally able to a degree, like he doesn't
Yeah.
have any mental or he doesn't have any cognitive issues. Everything is very much just like his body, but
Yeah.
like he's basically just any other 12 or 13-year-old kid in terms of cognitive ability. Like he's, perfectly, he's abled in that from what we saw.
Yeah.
So it's like we're able to get this perspective from him because of course he can do a narration, like of course he can tell you exactly how he's feeling because he processes things in an abled way in that regard. Whereas something
Mm-hmm.
like Truth's Confession, we did, it does make you wonder, like, did we not get Eddie's perspective in that because he is cognitively um, not developed as much. So it is. I think you get into that in that territory as well. And are we valuing somebody like a Justin higher than somebody like an Eddie? And then you can get into that. Not and that's not comparing the struggles, but I think in our system, it's like who is the person who's allowed to tell their story is valued more to a degree.
Yeah, and this is very much a film about worth. Like it is
Right.
clearly that is Justin's entire, and it's a very good premise for a film about a 12-year-old, period. You know what I mean? Because like when you're on the cusp of adulthood, which is like those teenage years, like you are literally attempting to figure out your worth in society, your place in society, where are you going to fall in the pack. So it really is like a film about worth, and I think that in that, like, it is a real question of like, even in sort of an attempt to tell the stories of those who don't fit the typical mold that has been crafted in the society, like how our like innate biases to even just storytelling, which we talked a bit about in True Confessions, but like how even our innate biases to storytelling can produce like worth, or like levels of worth, in assessing differently abled people to different degrees. So yeah, I think it's a film that opens up conversations in that general direction, uh, without not trying to like compare, like not necessarily like comparing struggles, but like it's a place to talk about what defines struggle to begin with, maybe.
Right. Right. No, I would agree with that. And I think we have to completely change our the system or the way that we relate to struggle, honestly. To
Yeah.
even properly get into that the way it should be. And I think something that's actually related to this that we thought was interesting was the dynamic between Seth and Justin. Just, Seth being his older brother and being this like super athletic guy, like the all-star kid.
Yeah.
The good at every sport, clearly has a good amount of friends, like fairly what seems to be like popular, or at least like people think he's like, like he's doing good. He's doing good. And him always feeling very under appreciated by his parents, especially compared to his brother, because his brother obviously has, some different needs. But he very much felt like his dad, especially towards the middle, was ignoring him in favor of going to his brother's games. He wasn't coming to sets anymore. X, Y,
Or I
Z.
think I think he never had been. I think that was the big, because I think that like what was being suggested was that like dad's never had the time to support me because he has to work two jobs, because we have extra expenses than the average family, because like Justin is in a wheelchair and Justin has medical needs
Mm-hmm.
that exceed the average child. Um, and I think like it was the thing of like he was watching, okay, like Justin's found something that Justin can do that is like sports related, and now dad is all in on that. Dad is like building this machine for him. Dad makes sure that he's at all his games and is coaching him, or not all his races, and is coaching him. And like Seth is like, what? Like Seth's kind of thing is like, but I thought that we didn't have time for that. Like I thought that was the narrative that I had been receiving my whole
Right.
life, that we didn't have time for that, and now I'm watching you do that for Justin, who I guess like the psychology there, like who has already taken time away from me.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that would be sort of the underlying psychology there. Which is, I don't know, I found the dynamic almost, actually, I will say, like I think I found it refreshing is probably the best way to describe it. I feel like and you see even in True Confessions, like we always see this version of like, or we see often these versions of like perfect siblings, right? Like, I even think about things like My Sister's Keeper and like the whole like crux of that, novel. Like this idea of like the perfect sibling who is like always like deeply understanding, who is always like I'm here for you, like I'm here, and it's like a whole thing of like the breaking point is like significantly more. There's a lot more going on with the breaking point, but like in this one, they make it pretty clear pretty early that Seth is, because I think the whole thing with him in therapy is specifically like he says that he has like a lot of anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
he does.
It's like they do this thing where it's like, and then they kind of double. I would argue that they double down on that later on when Justin comes home from the hospital and Seth is like, he's tried to keep from them that Justin got back into the derby. And when his dad is like, "What is wrong with you? Like, you need to stop this jealousy of your little brother like being good at a sport because that doesn't make any damn sense." And Seth is just like, "Are you like you like?" It's essentially like, "You think I'm jealous of him being good at a sport? I don't give a damn if he's good at a sport. It's not about that. Like, I'm happy he's good at a sport, but like, how are you okay? Like, we watched him almost die. How are you okay with him doing this again?"
Mm-hmm.
And like he expresses that whole thing about like I couldn't hold him as a baby because I would hurt him. Like it's this expression of like he as a sibling to Justin has like like we see from the beginning that like this is he has developed issues in relation to this as well. And they are things that like constantly berate him, and like the idea that like in particular it's anxiety, it's like a deep level of stress um about like literally the things that he can't control, and like not being able to assist in those things. He can't comfort his little brother when he cries as a baby. He can't do anything if his little brother's like spinal, like I forget what they call the specific drain that he has in his brain.
Hydrocephalus.
But no, not the issue. They have a it's a the they have a mechanism in his brain that's in there to
Oh,
help
yeah,
drain
yeah.
the
He has a
fluid.
plate, right, or something they call it.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't like a shoot or something like that.
Yeah, it's like yeah, shunt. Is that what it
Yeah,
is?
yeah. That's what it's a shunt in his brain. Like I can't control whether or not that thing works properly. You know what I mean? Like and I just appreciated that they don't make him this like sort of perfect understanding sibling who like apologizes immediately when he hurts his brother's feelings. Like they are active, like they make them two brothers um like who have like deep-seated issues with each other and who like kind of duke it out and won't talk for a little bit, but it's like at the end of the day that like they love each other, but like there's just this thing that is a strain on like the family and is going to be a strain on relations, and they just don't. I don't know. I just like because I guess like I know that in True Confessions is all about that as well, but I feel like in this they do a good job of like nobody's a villain and nobody's a saint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's literally just everybody dealing with it, and it develops in different. I mean, it creates a mama bear in his mom. It makes his dad a workaholic, but his dad really still wants to be there for his kids and really loves his kids, but like just is struggling to like balance that. And his brother's got a fuck ton of anxiety. His brother can put on a strong face, has learned to put on a strong face for the family and for the world, but like and even like when Justin was saying, like, he takes me around the field after his games, like all of that's like puts on a strong face, but inside is actually like deeply affected by like not being able, like not knowing how to like help his brother and not being able to control anything about that situation. I just appreciated that they sort of that is layered into the film.
Yeah, because I think the only other differently abled movie that we talked about, but they did focus on the sibling dynamic, was Truth's Confessions, which we discussed, I think last month or 2 months ago. But yeah, it's like it's a contrast to that because I feel like in that True, you get some similarities in terms of like she also feels very ignored by her parents because Eddie takes up a lot of time, and she just kind of gets like pushed to the back burner to a degree. But I do think that that one was a lot more of a typical type of or not typical, but just like a more loving relationship, or like more of a, I don't even know if I want to say loving, but it's just the way that she reacts around Eddie. Like she very much is constantly aware of it, and until that one moment where she kind of has the big blow up, like she's very understanding in a way that, I'm not saying Seth isn't, but I also think that there's a way in which like men process things versus like, or socialized to process things versus like how women are socialized to process things. And also their two younger siblings have two very different ability levels. Um
Yeah.
so that might also be playing into it. But you know, I think it's also, I think just think it's interesting to like look at the sibling dynamics and like how they're treated, and also the fact that, you know, in Truth Confessions, we're seeing it from her perspective. This one, we're seeing it directly from Justin, and how he sees his brother. So honestly, it makes me more interested in like if, in what like an Eddie would have seen, how he would have seen his sister. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do think it's like you have two very different dynamics going on between those two movies and the respective like sibling, and then they're differently abled younger sibling. And but they both have in common like the protectiveness, and then you know by the end like the complete like understanding and acceptance of like everything that they can't control in terms of their younger sibling. So that at least is like nice to get.
Yeah. It's a yeah, and I don't know, like I think I had a because like like I have a little sister, and she's fine, right? She doesn't have any, she's not differently abled in any way, or at least, not any that they have found medically. I think that there are some things that she could work on, but that's just a personal opinion. Um, but like, I don't know, like this, I guess it falls on, it was another one of those like movies from like sibling movies for me, that I like, I don't think latched onto, but I definitely like felt like I sympathized a lot with like the relationship between these two characters. And I guess just, and I think I've said something about this in True Confessions too, but it is just a thing of like having a sibling is like the best thing in the world, and also like like so difficult all the time, because it is just like they are literally the closest person to you. Especially if you grew up in the same house, if you have both of the same parents, like if you like, they are biologically the closest thing to that will ever exist to you if you don't have a twin. And then like, I don't know, it's like it's always like they're your mirror image, right? It's like all the things that you can do or can't do, like they're like this image of that, and it just creates a space where like it's just it's a deeply complicated relationship, and at the same time like one that is paramount. Like when you have something, it's like that is like going to be one of the most important relationships in your life, whether in a good or negative light, you know. And I don't know, it's just, this is just one of those films again where I just appreciated the way that they broke down a sibling relationship, because it felt authentic to me.
Yeah.
And that might be because it's also like based on a real person and a real family, like, so it's not gonna feel made up as much. But yeah, I just like it just felt authentic. Like I even said to you that whole thing where he talks about, now again, like very different, because like my little sister is not differently able in any way, but when he says the whole thing where he's like, if you like, we read this very differently. I think you were saying that when he says to like Justin, when he says to him like, oh, like I want to be able to beat you up so much like a normal like older brother, but I can't because you're in this wheelchair. Like you read that as very cruel, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Whereas like for me, it just immediately reminded me, I was like, God, I used to say that to my little sister all the time. Like when I was like we're about 5 years apart. When I was like 7, I used to be like, oh, I can't wait till you're 5 so I can hit you. And then I was like 10, I'd be like, oh, I can't wait till you're like 7 or 8 so I can hit you. And by the time I hit like 12 or 13, I was like, I don't want to hit my little sister. Like, I don't want to do that. But like, for me, it's like one of those things that I look back on in our relationship and like that thing I used to say to her. And I like think about how, like, for me, like, I wasn't very good at expressing my emotions. And I could understand in my adult brain now that that was me at that age, like, recognizing, like, oh, my little sister gets me so mad. And I just look at her and I'm so mad at her, but like, I don't ever actually want to hurt her. And I know better than, like, I know that I can't hit her because I'm going to hurt her if I hit her. The way that I might want to, like, just like shake her a little right now. The way that like siblings just like fight sometimes. So it's like I read that more of an expression of like of complicated love. But I also entirely see how it is cruel from other perspectives. And probably from the perspective of the one receiving it. But yeah, I don't know, like little things like that. It just felt like authentic, and it just felt authentic to me and something that I related to, like in this film.
Yeah, no, I do feel like it has such a big I feel like the film at the end of the day is really about the brothers, and their relationship and how they're learning to cope with one another because it's also, you have to think that Justin's also trying to cope with having this older brother who is who he is. Like it's not just
Yeah.
on Seth coping with Justin. It's symbiotic. It's both of them trying to figure out how to deal with each other. Um, so I definitely feel like that's really the crux of the movie, honestly. And them just like learning each other and learning how their relationship works. So yeah, I guess.
Or and can work, I guess, like how it can grow and change, and like how they can start making more allowances for each other. Um, I feel like is sort of in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and so I guess with that, Nina, do you want to show this one to your kids?
Um, yeah, I mean, this is it's a weird one because it's like a movie that I still kind of like enjoyed watching, but it does feel like at the same. It does feel like a movie that like I don't need to watch again in my life, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
like I like it, and I think it feels a little timeless in certain regards. Um, and I think that kids would enjoy watching it. I think that kids can take good things from it. It's just it's a weird thing of like it's like I like this movie. I would have no objections. I am not sure if a situation will come up where I will actively choose to show it to my kids. You know what I mean? Like it's just it lives in a weird limbo. But it's like a fundamentally net positive limbo, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I would definitely say, yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know. Yeah, it is a weird one. I think that's the thing about it. I mean, I feel like, we probably watched something with Frankie Muniz and I would probably be like, oh, you want to watch this one that he did? The our Puerto Rican king. And, Francisco, that's his real name. But yeah, I think it would probably come along those lines and just being like, like it's a cute one. I do think it's actually important to see differently abled films, and this is what we discussed during Truth Confessions, but at least from
Yeah.
the perspective or what we're assuming in the movie itself to be from the perspective of the differently abled person. Now it was written by abled people as far as we know, but still, it's like it's from Justin's perspective. So I do think like that's at least like good to show like, show kids like, hey, this is something that's from generally from their perspective and just a way for you to see like how somebody can look at the world that's different from you. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would definitely show it to them.
All right, cool. Well, with that, I think that, fundamentally we like the film. Watch it if you're feeling
Yeah, if
up
you're
to it.
keen.
And yeah, we will catch you guys next week.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of The Critics Kingdom. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and SoundCloud so you can stay up to date, as well as interacting and letting us know what you guys think on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Critics Kingdom and on Instagram at The Critics Kingdom. We're excited to talk to you again next week.